Hello, everyone. I feel glad to be part of this esteemed panel, and I'm looking forward to some very interesting discussion and looking forward to some powerful insights on the future of learning and development. Before we go ahead with the session, I would request a quick introduction from all of you, and maybe I'll start with a quick introduction from myself and then I'll go over to you. So I am Raman Singh. I head HR for ABB India, and I have about 2 decades of experience of working across various multinationals and Indian organizations. And learning and development is something which really interests me and I'm passionate about. So very, very interested in the conversation today. So with that, I'll move over to Professor Vasanthi.
Thank you, Raman. I'm Vasanthi Srinivasan, and I am a professor in the Organisational Behaviour and Human Resource Management at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Spent over 3 decades in HR, a large part of it in leadership development. And one of the interesting areas over the last few years that I've looked at is on leadership in the age of digital disruption. And who would imagine that some of the insights from there would actually be so relevant in the times that we are in? And over the last 7 years, I've also had the opportunity to experiment with digital learning on the edX platform through a course on people management. And currently, I chair the digital learning at IIM Bangalore. Happy to be here on this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vasanthi. And with that, I move over to Professor Wayne.
Hello, I'm glad to meet you all. My name is Wayne Brockbank. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan Business School. I've been working in studying the relationship between HR and organization practices as they relate to business strategy. So that's the area in which I focus. I'm the co-director of and core faculty of the Human Resource Executive Programs at the University of Michigan. They've been rated the #1 in the world for the last 35 years. That says how old I am, I think. And for the last 10 years, I've been on a retainer at the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority in Abu Dhabi, where I focused on making sure that what I say in the classroom actually can work at an in-depth level. And that has had substantial impact on their investment performance. And during that time, I've also worked over the last 40 years, I've worked with about 350 different companies, again, trying to make sure that what we say in the classroom can actually be applied and create value for companies. It's an honor to be with you. I have a family. I have 3 children. I have a dog sitting here by my side, and all the other children are gone and grown, and I'm just delighted to be with you today.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wayne. And with that, I will move over to Professor Chris Didi.
So I'm Chris Didi. I am a professor of learning technologies, leadership, and policy at Harvard University. For many decades, I've worked in different kinds of technology-enabled education, including distance education. My last 2 books, the second to last book was on engineering learning by using the rich data streams that come out of online learning. And my latest co-edited book is about lifelong learning in the global digital economy. So I'm looking forward to sharing ideas with you.
Thank you, Professor Chris. And with that, I move to Dr. Chris Abraham.
I'm Dr. Chris Abraham, CEO and Senior Vice President, SP Jain School of Global Management, an Australian business school ranked among the top 100, top 20 by Forbes Financial Times Economist. I've been with them right from the start and have dabbled for the last 34 years in consulting with governments, with corporates, and with academia. My areas of interest are, of course, organizational behavior and design thinking. But what I can bring into the forum is the convergence of diverse disciplines, including neuroscience, positive psychology, behavioral economics, and, of course, the latest science of learning and development. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of learning to go through with all these amazing colleagues around. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chris. And with that, I move over to Thiru.
Thanks, Raman. My name is Thirumala Arohi. I'm the head of learning. Basically, we call it as education, training, and assessment within Infosys. Infosys is always known to be one of the champions of culture of lifelong learning in the industry. We also have, incidentally, the world's largest corporate training center in Mysore, which we have been replicating across the world. So I'm happy to be representing Infosys in this esteemed panel today, where the focus of how do we basically look at always on learning, anytime, anywhere learning has been something that we have been doing for last few years, and how it has significantly helped us tide over the crisis of COVID. Because even before COVID, as Professor Vasanthi was talking about, we were always looking at how do we basically promote the digital learning, which allows you to kind of have always learning, as I said. And in that context, we have been experimenting quite a bit around leadership development, competency development on technology, domain, processes, and everything. And we also have launched recently two very good journals, which would be of interest to some of my panel members, which is called Future of Learning from a Corporate Lens. And then how do you measure learning effectiveness? How do you use the data and everything? So I would also be happy to get your feedback and insights on that. So thanks, Raman, for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Thiru. And thank you. And once again, a very, very warm welcome to all of you. And without taking much more time, maybe I'll start the discussion. And I'll start with I think one question which possibly is top of mind for all of us, and which is that learning has been going through a huge amount of change in the way it is delivered to the practitioners. And I think this present COVID situation has only brought it to an inflection point. So I wanted to know from this esteemed panel, what are the key developments or innovations that are happening in the field of learning and development, and how COVID is accelerating that change?
So one of the most important things any leader can ask is, what business is my organization in? In the United States, about a century ago, huge fortunes were made in the railroad business. But those fortunes evaporated almost immediately because the automobile and the airlines came along. People thought they were in the railroad business, but they were in the transportation business. I believe that many people now in talent development see themselves as in the episodic training and education business. Once in a while, you do a quick intervention, you help people upskill and move on. But actually, in the next half century, we're going to need to be in the lifelong learning business. And thinking about lifelong learning as a continuous type of upskilling is a really different business and really different kind of leadership than episodic education and training.
Let me just pick from where Chris left and build on it. I think there are three trends that I'm able to see, and very closely aligned from there is, if it is going to be lifelong learning, which it is, then it fundamentally alters about the way people have to think about their careers. Careers are no longer things created by organizations for their members, but careers are things that individuals need to think about as they negotiate and navigate their futures. Linked to that, this virtual work has kind of transformed the way people are going to look at the kind of learnings that they will require. And let me just kind of push the boundaries a little bit and kind of provocatively, I think the old traditional competency model of leadership and management that has underpinned what we did for the last 2 decades, I think is going to crumble. And the reason is quite simple, because under the garb of agility, under the garb of looking at integration, whatever work from home is going to look like, the future of workplaces is going to look like, and how it's impacting the worker. When I look at all of that, there's another interesting dimension that comes up, which is the whole idea of what is that bundle of capabilities, and I'm deliberately using the word capabilities, do I require to be continuously effective? And for now, I'm going to pause there. We'll come back and kind of pick it up and elaborate on that.
Just to build on what Professor Chris and Professor Vasanthi said, there was a very interesting experiment that was done a few years back by Dr. Sugata Mitra. Some of you may be familiar with this, which was about the hole-in-the-wall experiment, where Professor demonstrated that in a rustic part, many rustic parts of India, he was able to put a computer in a rural village, and where he just gave access to the computer to children who pretty much had either not gone to school or even if they had some literary skills, were not really competent to operate a computer. But guess what? The exciting learning that we got from that was within a couple of hours, children, because of their innate nature of curiosity, were able to start playing around with it. Long story short, in a couple of days, they were able to actually interact with the computer, download games and songs, and start understanding learning from that perspective. So the teacher-student perspective in learning and development, which used to be the traditional mode, I think needs to be challenged, needs to be questioned, because there's an innate nature in each one of us to be self-directed, which is how a lot of new initiatives have come in. The second thing that I want to bring in is 2 months back, it's exactly in April, for example, World Economic Forum, when it was analyzing the challenges that leaders face, with John Kay, a world famous economist, came with 6 very important intelligences, which they said would be extremely relevant, not just to survive, but thrive in the COVID and the post-COVID era. And they call these intelligences, number 1, contextual intelligence, which is the way to understand what happens around us and then form our opinions and competencies based on that. Ethical and moral intelligence goes without saying. Emotional and social intelligence, which we've been speaking about and becoming extremely relevant now with the social distancing and new kinds of technology connections and collaborations. The 4th one was generative intelligence, which is innovation, design thinking, creativity. The 5th one is digital and technology intelligence, which many of us are very, very familiar with and believe it's required. And the last one is transformational intelligence. So I think bringing in the concept of self-directed learning with the new awareness of these new intelligences and skills could put us in the right direction with, of course, the right kind of technology platforms, which I believe will now become more of the norm than the exception.
I would just add on, Raman, basically from our lens, what we are saying is the learning, especially for corporates as well as the executive programs, we call this as moving from a pedagogical mindset to a andragogical expertise, right? Because it has been always talked about, but unfortunately the way of teaching, the way of training has always been more like a sage on a stage model where someone is kind of imparting it. So we think it is moving away from that sage on a stage to a guide on a side, where I think it is more on experimenting, collaborative learning and everything. That is one thing. And purely from industry perspective also, what we are thinking is, a lot of you must have heard this, but I'll just use it just for the effect. The just-in-case learning mindset is moving to a just-in-time learning. There is also just for job learning, which is important because sometimes employees has to be continuously keeping themselves relevant for jobs. But at the same time, just for knowledge also is becoming more and more relevant, which means there's a just-in-case, just-in-time, just for jobs and just for knowledge. So how do you kind of allow your learning to be kind of driven or compartmentalized so that anyone in a corporate, for example, or even for that matter outside the corporate, have access to the learning that they need depending on the context? I think that contextual learning or contextual intelligence that Professor Abraham talked about is also important. But moving away purely from a sage on a stage to a guide on a side, experimenting, curiosity, driving the culture of not just my learning, but me and my fellow learning together, so that knowledge management also is becoming a part of learning.
Thank you. Thank you. I think some very, very interesting insights from all of you. And maybe I'll ask this question to Professor Wayne. As in, we have heard all our esteemed panel talked about the various aspects of how learning has changed. So, Professor Wayne, do you see that, or what do you think that the HR leadership or the learning and development professional should be doing differently to enable this new kind of learning? Are we doing enough, or more is required to be done to be able to enable this new set of learning?
Okay, in my heart of hearts, like my other colleagues, I'm an empiricist. That is, I like hard data to support positions. The longest stream of empirical data on career development, I think, can go back to the Harvard Business School on the critical incidence approach to career development, which says that the high-performing people early in their careers have had a critical incident. That is, they faced a huge challenge that was difficult, it was stressful, it was going to be a career maker or breaker in their careers, and those that could meet that challenge would then grow and develop and go to the next stage, and those that didn't would fall off to the side. And in the history of HR, and I've asked that for a management team, management for classes and senior HR classes around the world, especially India. I think I mentioned my last trip to India was number 127. So I spent a lot of time in the Indian in India working on these issues. But HR professionals that I know frequently think about when they're guiding leadership development, they think that they need to make sure that these high potential people don't fail. So they send up mentoring programs. They hold them by the hand. They do everything they can to make sure they don't fail. But when I asked the question, leadership teams, what was the experience like that brought you to your current level of performance? What was that critical incident like? It was stressful, it was difficult, it was challenging. I was alone, it depended on me. Maybe I led a team, but the responsibility was solely centered on me. And then I asked the question, so for how many of you is that was somebody holding your hand? And 80% say, no, I was on my own. If I succeeded, I succeeded. If I didn't succeed, then I was pushed off to the side. The problem is that a lot of HR folks will say, our job is to make sure the high potential people don't fail. And what I learned from leaders who have been successful is they did it on their own. Nobody was holding their hand. Nobody was making sure they didn't fail. And I think that's a shift that has to occur on the part of HR leadership development specialists, is they need to be able to provide people that they trust high challenging, very difficult tasks, and then trust them to do it. And if they pass, then they rise. If they don't pass, well, then you go on a different career track, or you don't go on a career track at all. So that's, I think, one of the key changes that need to occur in the HR world, to trust people to succeed. And if they don't succeed, that's fine. Then they go on a different track.
I think that's a very interesting insight. And again, just building on that question further, I think there's a lot of emphasis now on digitally enabled learning. And I think this emphasis has further got accentuated because of COVID now. So do we see this changing the way we approach learning and development? And if yes, how do we prepare ourselves, both as academia and as practitioners, to ensure that we continue to maximize the learning opportunities that we provide to our team members?
Because over the last 3 months, since COVID, which I would say March 24th for us in India, since the lockdown, I think my insights in this area are just kind of becoming more nuanced. So let me begin with the first assumption I think a lot of HR people still carry, which worries me, is that all of these attitudes, relatively what line managers refer to as other aspects of management, people management, all of these somehow have to be done only face-to-face for high impact. Okay?
Yes.
Now, I think this myth for me was busted when I did the first course on edX on people management, which runs even today. And we have some incredible data on the kind of impact it has made. And I'm really proud to say that Infosys has been one of my strongest champions in experimenting with it as an organization. Okay. And almost every year, just anecdotally, I receive mails from people who tell me that just the insight and reflection that they got in the course helped them to navigate their careers better. Okay. So I think this is a myth that we have to get rid of. The second myth is that there has to be a teacher and a taught. No, there has to be an insightful and a nuanced facilitator. There has to be solid content that makes people understand the essentials. And last but not the least, they need a peer community that teach them to be able to move in their learning. And the third one that for me is what happens to the traditional assumptions of leadership? Can we not create opportunities for the kind of things that Wayne was talking about, challenging assignment? How do we get people to stretch and collaborate virtually? I mean, these are the things we are now experimenting with and saying, what is it? I mean, to me, what we are going through gives an opportunity for collaboration. I think leadership just need to think, and it's kind of paradox, but they need to probably think 3 to 5 years ahead, however that future might look like, because then you can create plenty of opportunities. But with the leadership teams that I work with, wherever they are thinking the next 90 days and the next 9 months, my own experience has been that they are not able to harness and leverage the power of peer learning, the power of the digital technologies, and above all, the learner curiosity and the learner openness. So to my mind, yes, digital will change the way we look at learning and development. But the question really is, are we ready as learning and development professionals to throw away our traditional assumptions of learning and development? I think as faculty, it's been really difficult on us over the last few months as we have struggled to manage the digital engagement with our students. It hasn't been easy, but I think as I see faculty navigate, I believe it's also making them more mindful, which I hope will enable them to go back to the class as better teachers in a face-to-face context. Yeah.
Just to add to what Professor Vasanthi said, we had a very interesting challenge last year, much before COVID. So we had this Swiss-based multinational company who said we wanted to do a leadership development program for the top management. Very exciting proposition. The only challenge was these guys were from 22 different countries. So we were trying to dabble with the idea, would you like to bring them to Singapore campus, to our Sydney campus, Dubai campus? They said, no, we want them to be where they are, and you'll have to deliver digitally. And we were thinking, it was a very perplexing, challenging situation. How do we really deliver? Can we do an engaging learning? And we didn't want to lose the client because very prestigious, large multinational based out of Switzerland. So long story short, we actually were able to get our own engaged learning platform. So we call it ELO. Only 6 universities or colleges across the world have it, including Harvard and Oxford. So we are one of them. And the key word there is engaged learning, E, the engagement part, which Professor spoke about so articulatedly. So how do you engage digitally? So we had people from 22 different countries across time zones. We're talking about people in China, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, India, Dubai. The guy from Dubai refused to come to the Dubai campus. He was there where he was in his office or at home. And then you had people from Europe, from Africa, and we were able to seamlessly get them across and deliver the program, because as she said, it's about the excitement in the content, the excitement in the collaboration, the challenges in the assignment, and of course, the way you can engage them. So one of the key learnings that we got was every 15 minutes after a framework or an idea, I was one of the professors there, so I had a actual hands-on experience in delivering it, would be after every 15, 20 minutes, there would be a pause which would go for a game, for an exercise, for an experiential learning, which they apply. And they would have to collaborate. So we had these digital breakout rooms. So the person from China would collaborate with the guy from Europe, from Egypt or from Dubai, and they would all come together in that digital breakout room. The professor can get into the room. Absolutely exciting stuff. It is a learning curve for all of us, but the exciting good news is that it does work. People came back raving about it. And now the good news is that the first cohort is over. So now they want us to do it for the next cohort. We're just waiting for dates to be finalized, and it will continue. So simultaneously, we had a challenge at the academic level when on March 8th or March 1st week, all our campuses from Sydney, Singapore, Dubai were asked to close and students were asked to leave. So we had a big challenge in our hands. Again, ELO, Engaged Learning Online, came to the forefront. Initial challenges, people not able to concentrate. But again, it's just a learning curve. And in a situation where you have a sink or swim, I think the options are obvious that you would attempt to swim and survive. And now from survival, I think we're moving to a thriving phase where we are trying to learn how we can enhance the same experience. We have even gone to the extent of experimenting technologically, how in a digital space, when a professor is doing something digitally, how we can create eye contact for 40 to 50 participants sitting in different parts of the world with their laptops and content. It's been co-created by our own IT development team, but it's been a great success for us, and I would be happy to share more insights if somebody's interested.
So what I'm hearing you say, we should sell our stock in classroom construction companies.
I think we're moving towards it inevitably, without choices.
But I think let us look at it in a different lens, right? Even in a classroom, for example, at Infosys, we do almost 10,000 trainees learning at any given point of time. In a class, there are 50 to 80 people anytime, right? So it is very difficult for one professor standing to basically engage the 50 people even in a physical classroom. Forget the COVID situation. So whatever Professor Abraham talked about, the same thing what we have done is we embrace digital learning, especially even in a classroom. Even if it is a physical classroom, everyone is still leveraging the same platform, so that someone who is, if you look at it, the students or leaders, anyone who is a learner, they have different paces of learning, different ways of learning. So as long as you allow them to kind of continue with that learning using the same digital setup in a physical, location, then when COVID happens, it was a seamless switch, right? You just switch on this and switch off that, which means we had the same situation as Professor Vasanthi was talking about 24th of March. 2 days before, we kind of evacuated 9,000 trainees from campus. But 4 days later, everyone was seamlessly on in the same platform as Professor Abraham talked about, because they're all used to the same thing. I think definitely the point is some learning thing may be needed for the faculty, because the students or the learners are basically now digital natives in some sense. In the last 10, 15 years, they're already used to the Netflixes, the YouTubes, whatever you call it. So they know it all. The professors needs to have some kind of orientation to say it is not a bad thing. It is not replacing the individual capability of the professor. It's only supplementing them to kind of reach out to the different people at different pace of learning needs, which means the platform with this power of digital emits, digital data, will actually help you to know where do you spend the focus on, where do you not spend the focus on, who do you allow that flexibility to kind of fledge on their own, who do you kind of guide and mentor a little bit. So I think the data actually plays a huge role outside of the experience in the digital learning.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm just summarizing, I think, some key points that have come through over the last few minutes. So one is, I think we as professionals and academia need to introspect and get out of our own misconception. And in fact, we had a learning in ABB wherein we thought this year learning is not going to be there, or people will not participate in training. But with the help of my learning team and very enthusiastic participation from the employees also, we might actually exceed our learning hours this year compared to what we have been able to do in the last 2 years. So I think that is one step that all of us need to, I think, go out of our comfort zone in understanding what is really possible. And as you rightly said, Thiru, that yes, we have digital natives joining us. So I think more and more the pressure will be on us to ensure that we have the right skill in, obviously, among the academia professor and also in the trainers that are available, so that they can provide the content in the most powerful manner. And another very interesting, I think, thread that came up, I think a couple of you talked about it, that the learning shift will also happen wherein the learner has to seek what he or she wants to learn. So not just learning about the job, but learning for knowledge, learning for what is relevant. And hence, we need to also use this new environment or the new situation to make the transition. And on that, maybe I'll request Professor Chris Diddy to kind of talk about from his experience of lifelong learning in terms of how do we inculcate or how do we maximize that ability wherein an individual takes the ownership of learning on himself or herself.
So when we talk about preparing leaders and leaders in developing talent, we pay a lot of attention to what they should learn, but we don't really think as much as we need to about unlearning. So unlearning happens when your identity, your professional identity, is very much tied up with a particular set of practices. For example, there's a lot of leaders who use command and control, and they ably manage their staffs. And of course, one of the things that we talked about earlier is that with the pandemic, the command and control structures broke down, and a lot of individual initiative was needed. It was a kind of distributed leadership, leadership without followers, where every person assumed leadership and responsibility for certain parts of what they were doing. It's a big shift for someone who's a command and control leader to move to distributed leadership without followers. They have to unlearn important parts of their identity. It's a big shift to move from thinking that you're in the episodic training business to the lifelong learning business. You have to unlearn a lot of parts of your identity. And it's a big shift to move from face-to-face learning to remote learning, because people think of distance education as an inferior form of face-to-face learning. Yes. But actually it's an orange. It's not a small apple. It's an orange. And so you can mourn the fact that you can't make pies with oranges, but you ignore the fact that there's things that you can do with oranges that don't work very well with apples. And as we look at the strengths and what remote learning offers us, and we've already talked a bit about that, we have to unlearn this idea that everything goes into face-to-face. Unlearning requires a lot of emotional and social support. It's not purely a cognitive thing. I see a lot of leaders who understand perfectly the shift that they have to make, but they can't do it. They can't do it because their identity is too tied up in the old practices. So I think that's one important issue that we need to confront.
Could I weigh in on that a little bit? The unit of analysis in learning traditionally has been the individual. How do we create learning platforms for individuals to increase their emotional skills, their technical skills, or whatever? In the last round of the Human Resource Competency Study at the University of Michigan, we have over now, we think it's the largest database in the world, including in India, on HR professionals. We have about 100,000 people in the database. And what we've found is that HR professionals as individuals have 1/4, if they have a high level of competence, have 1/4 the impact on customer value, shareholder value, and community value than when the HR organization as a department works together in an integrated, cohesive way. So that raises a fascinating question. That shifts our unit, if those data are accurate, they are what they are, but that shifts then the unit of analysis from developing individuals, as we've been talking about, to redefine talent to be developing social contexts that then, or organizations or teams that can function well. And I think that's HR professionals that are traditionally thought in terms of talent in developing individuals will need to fundamentally shift their unit of analysis to how do they develop organizations. And I don't think, at least I see a lot of HR professionals are not thinking in those terms yet, but our data tell us that that's where value is going to be created in the future, is how do you create organizations that are successful and not just individuals. And the logic is pretty compelling. If you by definition only develop individuals, then by definition, the whole will be equal to the sum of the parts. But the job of competitive advantage is to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, and that moves beyond individual talent and has to start to think in terms of organizational talent. And I think that's a new area for exploration that we're just getting started in, but it's a really important issue for HR folks, especially with psychology backgrounds that focus on individual excellence, to move towards the economic paradigm of institutional excellence. Excellent.
Raman, can I just add to this, please? When I made the distinction of capability, when I made this distinction between competence and capability, I think what Professor Wayne said just comes out so strongly because our focus is on leader development. And I think a lot of our efforts have gone in that direction. The moment we are seeing collaboration and innovation as key distinctive features, a lot of that happens across teams. So to my mind, when we conceptualize leadership development in a digital context in particular, and I'm framing, I still believe the weak link is the leadership development or the collective, the power of the collective that's still missing because we are constantly going back to building capacity of individuals. And what concerns me, and it'd be wonderful to hear from some of you on this, is that my fear is that the way the platforms have got structured, the learning platforms, and the fact that you're opening up the organization and kind of linking what Chris was talking about, distributed leadership, what kind of methodologies would we need to do collective leadership development? Even more interesting, and I think it would be worthwhile looking at, as self-direction increases and as autonomy enhances in virtual work, does it conflict with the traditional models or the hitherto undiscovered models of leadership development? I mean, it's an interesting question just listening to what each of you are talking about. Yeah.
Just to give the research perspective to it, there's already a lot of work that's happening. One is the wisdom of crowds. That collaborative intelligence, collective intelligence is definitely much better than a single person's thought process. The other one, which was experimented by Procter & Gamble a few years back, was the concept of moving the research and development, the traditional research and development, R&D, to what they call connect and develop, C+D, which was a radically different way of looking at it, where they threw open all the innovation challenges to the world at large, invited participation from the global community to address their issues. And as the proof of the pudding is, that in the 7 years that they ran the C+D initiative, they had more innovations than all the 100 years that they had done in-house innovation. So I think there's plenty of merit in what Professor Wayne said. And I think there needs a huge mind shift to move from individual leadership competency development to a collective mindset where we look at the power of community, power of groups. And there's also, a very interesting tongue-in-cheek book written by the German anthropologist, Stephen Klein, who said survival of the nicest, where he says altruism, contributing, collaborating is what made us thrive in a world. So it wasn't survival where we competed with each other. I think we need to move from the competitive mindset to a collaborative mindset, even more so in the digital era that we live in. So from competition to co-opetition, and there's another fancy term called frenemies. We don't have any enemies, but we have frenemies. And I think leadership development needs to take cognizance of these things and move in the right direction.
Again, very, very interesting concept. And I think I can concur with what you're saying, that we move away from the traditional method of, maybe measuring learning ROI or, return on investment on learning to measuring this. So would be interested to read more about it, but I think we are kind of moving in the right direction. And picking up from what you said, Dr. Chris, that yes, we are moving to a more collaborative world, and possibly the present situation is further pushing us in that direction. So in that context, again, just a specific question that typically, especially I'm talking about India here, that our education system is built on something which is competition, as in all of us compete with each other, and suddenly we come to the corporate and then we hear the word collaboration and all the various continuum of it. So how well do you think we need to change in terms of how we are preparing our young students to reach or to work in the corporate world, wherein competition is not the keyword, but as you said, frenemy or collaboration, etc., is the keyword?
Can I ask Wayne to do it? 128 times did Wayne say that he's come to India. It'd be great to listen to him talk about his perceptions and how do you look at this?
Well, I'm an institutional specialist. I'm not an educational specialist. So that question may be outside of my area of expertise. I mean, I have strong opinions on a lot of things, but undergraduate high school education in India is not one of them.
I can attempt this from an academic perspective because we have a very strange experiment. Now, our undergraduate program, like our other programs, are all global. So we have a large contingent of Indians because of the strong brand identity they have with SP Jain. So about 40 to 50% are Indians. But here's the exciting part. The remaining 50% come from all parts of the world, from Guatemala, from Mexico, from Panama, from US, Europe, Africa, and Asia. So now here, what we do is, here's the fun part. We put them all together in combined groups. So we have a Chinese, we have a Russian, we have a Brazilian, we have a Mexican, and we have an Indian. So since you asked about the Indian context, this becomes very exciting. trust me, the Indian guy finds it extremely difficult initially to realize that it is together that you're going to make it better. And you would find them coming back and saying, Prof, I don't think I can work with this group. This is, this is not my kind of thing and all that. But we pushed them into it. Now it's 7 years in the making. It's an experiment that's worked wonderfully well. We also forced them to stay together in global communities. So in each of our campuses in Dubai, Singapore, Sydney, they are forced to, they don't have a choice. You can't say, I'll stay with my, Indian community or, Russian community. No, you are forced to stay with them. And that in itself is a learning curve. It's extremely difficult, challenging, but the good news is that they start adapting, start learning, and they start coming. So if it's of any relevance to the conversation, that's my two cents on that.
My only view, Raman, is this. It's not a question of Indian context, right? I think it only varies, to be frank, in the top 10% of the students in India. Because if you look at, if I am wearing my student hat, I see a lot of collaboration that happens where students talk to each other, help each other to learn. A lot of collaboration actually happens because they are not worried about the top 10%. I think the place where we need to change is the top 10%, because a lot of others actually quite easily help each other. There are students writing notes for others. There are students who help their own perspective of how they understood the context. So I think we just need to figure out that part, I think. But I think it's a very important question, because in organizations, as Professor Wayne talked about, we always say, no, guys, reuse, don't try to build everything, all of that. And even in organizations, when you start putting the goals to individuals as an individual goal, that becomes a problem, right? So I'm just switching gear from academic to corporate. I think you would have also tried it in when we have been adapting agile methodologies, agile ways of delivery. We have experimented with team goals, which means as a part of the goals, you will not have any goal only for yourselves, meaning you survive together, you fail together, right? Which basically means at the start of the cycle, the Scrum team basically is told, if the Scrum is successful, if the sprint is successful, only then you will actually meet your goals. Then what happens is it start helping each other, saying, no matter how well I do my own work, if I don't collaborate, if I don't support. But the problem, unfortunately, is it was never scaled. And this is where, again, I think Professor Wayne or someone was talking, there has to be a change from the HR policies, HR perspectives, where how do you promote that institutional focus more than individual? Because more often we go and talk to individual as an individual engagement. So while we experimented at Infosys, I don't think it has really taken off very well, the team goal concept.
Okay.
I found that Indian executives simply collaborate different than any other group of executives in the world. Most executives, when they're trying to collaborate, somebody will talk, then they'll let somebody else talk, and then somebody else talk. And in India, executives, they talk at each other, and it's such a rich and exciting environment to teach, but it is chaos because everybody's trying to talk over each other. They're trying to argue because that's the way they're raised to compete. You put them in a team context where they have to collaborate, and they just are always talking over each other, which raises an interesting issue from a technological standpoint. When you're doing remote learning, how do you have people talk over each other when the technology doesn't let you do that? I don't know. That's a new world for how to teach executives to collaborate when they're accustomed to talking over each other. Technology doesn't let them do it.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Correct. So I think some interesting inputs, and I'm just going to build on another thread of conversation I think that came across about distributed leadership. And I think, again, a lot of you would agree to this experience that we are in right now. So because of COVID, I think a lot of us had to work remotely, digitally. And actually, the amount of trust and freedom that was available to the executives had actually increased. And many of us felt that, you could connect to the leadership team better, you could contribute better. So are there more research in this area? Do you guys also had similar experiences about it? Would like to hear from this panel, some thoughts on this point of view.
In developing leadership, often the focus has been on cognitive skills of different kinds. And in recent years, people have said, well, you can have somebody who's really good cognitively, but if they don't have psychosocial skills in working with other people, then they're going to fail. So now there's two levels of skills that they're talking about. But I think really, if we talk about lifelong learning and multiple careers and continuous upskilling, there's a third level that we haven't spent much thinking on, which is disposition. And of those three areas, disposition is the hardest to change because it's really wired in by your whole set of experiences. And yet, it's very powerful. Somebody who's open-minded versus closed-minded, somebody who is flexible and who welcomes ambiguity because they see opportunity in ambiguity rather than being threatened by ambiguity. Somebody who's tenacious and they don't give up just when they encounter an obstacle and fail the first time, but they keep going. And if we're going to have distributed leadership, if people are not going to be followers who look for somebody else to tell them what to do, they're going to have those dispositions. And we're going to have to think about how those come out. They can't be taught, but they can be learned. And I think giving people the opportunity to learn those and providing the kind of mentoring and coaching and support that's necessary is going to be a key frontier for talent management.
I think talking about the research, so a few years back, there was very interesting research between routine, monotonous jobs and jobs that require cognitive skills. And that's when they found out, apart from the money, which is the base level, the three things that are important, which is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So three very critical dimensions that came out. And if we could focus on these three, because money is a given, so we need the money, it's given, but providing people the autonomy, the empowerment, the trust, saying that you're capable of doing it, and a certain element of hand-holding, certain element of mentoring, coaching, and then allow them to do it, provides remarkable results across the world. So this has been validated in the last decade or so, that autonomy works. People want to be self-directed. They want to be their own bosses. And today, because of this new COVID scenario, we have created this unique platform, unique opportunity where people have to do it on their own. You have to trust them. I mean, I can share our own example across campuses. We felt, how are people going to be monitored? Where's the time and time out? And then we realized you don't need time and time out. People know what they're supposed to do. They have a set of deliverables. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, we were delighted to see people were delivering much beyond what we would expect, even on a normal day. And to put the record straight, there are no weekends because we work on weekends also. Work from home means it's 7 days a week, depending on your choices. So I think the degree of autonomy is a question of organizational culture, where the organization leadership allows people to thrive, provide them a platform, provide them the resources, the tools, and certainly they would be, on their merit to do and perform and deliver. And as Professor Chris said, it's a question of, learning, unlearning, and relearning. So we need to allow that process to happen, and leaders need to let go. So the traditional leader, command and control leader, needs to realize he or she needs to be a coach, a catalyst, a communicator, and a connector. So the roles are redefined now. So it's no longer command and control. So
last January, my daughter and I ran the Disney half marathon, and I flew in from Abu Dhabi and arrived about 1 o'clock in the morning at one of the Disney hotels. The registration desk was empty except for one individual. So I asked him, so how do you like your job? He said, I love my job. Really, why do you like your job when you're working the graveyard shift? He's because I don't have a boss. I don't have somebody looking over my shoulder, checking everything that I do. I get my work done. I'm efficient, and I love my job. Well, it just, a month later, COVID hit, and lo and behold, we found a good portion of the world is in that same situation, where they don't have a boss, where they don't have somebody looking over their shoulder. They're not functioning in the context of bureaucratic oversight. I've seen 4 studies that have been done in the last couple of months to test what's happened with the workforce logic during the COVID-19 pandemic. And across the board, across the world, in 2 of them are different countries, they found that Dr. Chris indicated that they're felt like they're more trusted and more interesting is they're more productive. They feel like they're more productive. They're more collaborative, and leaders are making decisions more quickly. So everything's gotten better. And the question is, if we talk about distributed leadership and distributed learning, that's all gotten better in the last 4 months. What are HR departments going to do to their organizations when all of a sudden the COVID-19 pandemic's over? Are we going to go back to the same old way of doing stuff with bureaucratic oversight, where we don't trust people, where we don't trust them to develop their own careers, where we don't, where leaders go back to their old bureaucratic ways of dictating, command and control? So I think I don't know the answers, but I do know we're at a moment of opportunity that's going to close in the next few months. And we have, and probably it's going to be the case, like Infosys, that organizations that learn from this context are going to grow and flourish, and those that go back the old way of doing things are going to be sloughed off into the dustbin of history.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think Thiru, so I'll just ask you a question building on what Professor Wayne has said. And I think it's a very interesting insight that, because of pandemic, some of these virtues which are time tested are really coming up to be true. And I think we are also, all of us are experiencing it in different ways. So the question that again I have to this esteemed panel is, I'm assuming leadership is timeless and the principles of leadership should exist. And, we have talked about contextual leadership, and hence whether it is before COVID, during COVID, or after COVID, ideally it should be the same. But the question again, just to get my head clear is leadership as a paradigm going to change post-COVID or during COVID? And hence, do we expect leaders to now act differently? And in that context, maybe Thiru, maybe I'll pick up from you. So how are you as an organization looking at it differently, that post-COVID world, whether it's the way you organize yourself, whether it is the way you build talent or the talent pipeline for your organization? So are you thinking of doing it differently? And then maybe I'll ask this question to the panelists also, in terms of what is it that theory or research is telling us on what should be our emphasis in terms of building leaders which can thrive in the new normal now. So over to you, Thiru.
Thanks a lot. I think even before COVID, as I said, one of the things our leadership basically asked us was, for leaders, we just like in developers, I don't know if you have heard about this word called full stack developer, which basically means a developer is supposed to have more than one skill, a combination of skills, adjacent skills, deep in one skill, but at the same time having a great set of adjacent skills. Nandan, who is our chairman, basically asked the leaders saying, how can you become full stack leaders? Which basically means you cannot be just having only wearing one functional view or one particular horizontal or vertical view. How do you become full stack? So we started running some programs in combination with our leadership development leaders, where we said as a combination, we need to first make sure that everyone is equipped enough to know what is the changing dynamics in the market, what are the client expectations, what are the people expectations, and what is their own expectations on the leaders, right? So based on that, we created a program called Full Stack Leaders kind of a thing. Then one of the ideas that came out from one of our learning and development specialists was, every time we talk about leadership as leaders mentoring others, can we do reverse mentoring? Where basically we identified a select set of very good what you call junior, whether it's an architect or a developer or a manager. And we said, why don't you now mentor the senior leaders, saying that, well, how do they see these things differing and everything? So that's a good one, which we felt was working out. And the last part that we did was, as a part of leadership development, again, driven by our leadership development team, where we basically created a set of constellation projects. We call it as a constellation project. Internally, we have 4 different constellations. Each of them are talked about not just learning in isolation. I think, as Professor Vasanthi was talking about initially, we basically created a set of strategic projects which are important for the company if we need to really grow completely. And then about 12 projects were identified. About 200 leaders were actually selected and asked to work together. And they are actually supposed to complete delivering on that. They're measured on that. There are goals towards them. So it's not an individual goal. Again, it's a team goal. So I think this is the first time I'm seeing, I've been in Infosys for now 23 years. The way I think the leadership development program is now suddenly working is, there's a lot of collaborative spirit. There's absolutely that individual selfish hats are removed actually. And I'm not saying it because I'm also one of those in one of those constellation projects, and they're working together. So my view is definitely I think things are going to be different, because the only thing that we are actually asking for ourselves is, don't only start thinking of virtual world or a distributed world. You should, again, as I said initially, if you are able to seamlessly switch context in a physical context to a virtual to a semi to anything, and whatever platform or whatever ecosystem that we build in, it has to allow you to seamlessly switch across that. If you don't do that, as Professor Wayne was talking about, when we are talking about distributed management or distributed leadership, and if you come back to physical and it's a separate thing that you have to do, then actually you will get into a problem. And the last part I wanted to say was, there's also a myth that in distributed leadership, people don't have a boss. In fact, the amount of data, the amount of information that is there for managers to leaders on what the teams are doing is actually quite phenomenal. And that is where actually leaders are able to take the decisions well, because they're able to see the data which otherwise they should have been using. They have not used that, but now they're able to comfortably see that no, actually teams are working. Maybe I was not really thinking about a selfish thing. If someone wants to work from home previous to COVID, I was always worried whether they'll really work from home or not. Now suddenly everyone is trying to prove a point. If you see from morning 9 to evening 10, they're actually working, irrespective of whoever. The leaders as well as managers as well as teams know each other families better. Now, initially everyone was worried about what the background of my video should be. Now they're not even worried, and they say hi to the families. So the bonding also has increased. So the only thing is, you need to just figure out how do you sustain it, as Professor Wayne said, and the only way to do it is, you should not be having developing systems or developing ecosystem which is only fit for distributed. It has to be omni-channel kind of an experience.
Thanks, Thiru. So, Professor Vasanthi, I can see that you have some very interesting insight on this area. So, would be glad to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. I have been tracking cohorts of executives, just asking them two things. And I've had the luxury of teaching them from March. So every week we go back and we have a reflective journal on which there are just two questions. What is it that you did differently this week that you hadn't done last week? What is the implication of this remote work on your life? Okay. And these two questions week on week are giving me some great insights. There are some, so I will basically talk about the positives. And the second one is, what is it that we should be worried about as COVID eases? I think the first thing that almost everyone has said, and you've all spoken about it in different ways, which is a double-edged sword, which is productivity is improving, efficiency is improving. People can see it for themselves. And all of us have spoken about long hours and the toll that it will take on personal well-being for sure. The second one, interestingly, over the weeks, people are saying that listening remotely takes a lot of effort. I'm unable to see the cues, and therefore I have actually become a better listener, and I speak much less than what I did earlier because I had to give people opportunity to speak. That's the second one. But people are also telling me that the fact that I'm going to be in a meeting and there is a chat that is going on continuously is also quite distracting, because I have to constantly switch between contexts. And that's not something that I have done in the past, that in simultaneity, I need to do multiple things, which I have never done before. And that's the second piece that's coming. So there's a positive to it, but there's also a flip side, which doesn't seem to be very enabling. The third one is that long hours with technology, and there is a lot of research which says that technology interacts with the human and changes the brain in ways that humans have no control over. So in some ways, I'm asking, what is it that's happening to my brain as I am engaging like this? And what is it that I am missing in not having social interactions? And whenever we come back to face, do we even know what it is that I don't understand or I have lost, and what is it that I have gained? Okay. And last but not the least, which is equally important, is, and there are virtues that have come out of the last few months, particularly in contexts like India, and some of them I can extrapolate to the global context. And one of them is that more and more women are telling me that, more and more leaders are telling me that, where have my women been all along? They are delivering outstanding results. They are, okay, how is it that I didn't notice? Because they are taking on responsibility and accountability and delivering far better. Now, the women employees are actually telling me that just being able to schedule their work time, is giving them the opportunity to aspire to grow in the organization. There's a virtue, okay? What will happen to this when we go back to the well-known networks, okay? And then, of course, the piece on people who are quiet, men or women, people who don't know how to have conversations with their bosses about their work, all of them actually seem to be gaining. So in some ways, those highly self-managed individuals are shining in this new environment. So what really happens to all that office politics, the office networks? That is the one that really worries me as I look into the future. Yeah. Let me stop.
In your studies, have you sensed any impact of the working at home, these long hours, on family life?
Yes.
Is that having positive or negative impact on families? Is your research picking that up?
Yes, I've been doing qualitative interviews with men and women. And it's interesting that the spillover is clearly not enabling when it is related to stress and challenging assignments. So this kind of comes back to what you were mentioning earlier. The more the challenging assignments that they are given, and the more that they have to kind of upskill very quickly, the greater is its negative impact on the family life.
Oh, thank you. So again,
just wanted to share one more insight here based on real experience. Just 1 minute, which is exactly what in sync with what Professor Vasanthi said, because I just completed 2 senior level personal effectiveness course for mid and senior level leaders. Very similar challenges, the virtues of learning plus the challenges of using digital. So one of the things which we are practicing, which we're trying, and which is really working, is to give them simple tips on mindfulness, engaged breathing, meditation. So we take breaks, on those things. And those seem to read digital detox, if I may use one broad term, digital detox. So during the interactions in class, we don't allow them to use the mobiles. So it's sacrosanct that it's a proper classroom. It's just that we are, divided by distance. And these are mid and senior level executives. So they have to be away from their mobiles, put it on silent, and be engaged with us. And initially, they find it very difficult. As she said, it's very difficult to, balance between the chat that goes on the side and things like this. But I think increasingly, we are finding people in the same journals that she spoke about, the learning journals, we're finding people practicing these things and saying that there is a great outcome. On a lighter note, but very relevant, is this research that's going on that the 8 countries which have very, very effectively managed COVID are all led by women. So that validates what Professor Vasanthi just said. And there's a lot of research that's going on now, including from Harvard, where they're studying what is it that makes the difference. So maybe there's some interesting insights there.
Yeah. So thanks, Dr. Chris. And I think we are running towards the end of our session. I think some amazing insights, but just so that, we have captured all possible perspectives, maybe I'll give each of you a quick 30-second bite in terms of if there's anything that we may have missed out in our conversation or question that we may not have asked. So quick 30-second from each of you to kind of add or summarize anything you would want to leave behind as the key message from you. And I'll start with you, Professor Chris Didi.
Well, I think we're learning a different lens on who's talented and what talent means in organizations. and taking a careful inventory and understanding the new shining stars that we see, and perhaps some former shining stars who are really struggling, is going to be very helpful in understanding how we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chris. Professor Wayne?
Yeah, one of the things we've hinted at, but we didn't talk about explicitly, is the role, given that our audience primarily for this conference will be senior HR professionals from around India. HR's role in the architecting of organization-wide information is what HR professionals do worst out of all the possible activities they can be involved in. But at the same time, in organizations where HR professionals do engage in helping the organization to architect information for learning and business purposes, has greater impact on creating value for customers, shareholders, and communities than anything else that HR folks can get involved in. And as we come out of the COVID world, the HR professionals are going to have to think through, how do we play a more active, proactive role in helping to architect the total flow of information throughout the firm so that people get the right information, they analyze it right, they debate it healthily, and then they apply it in powerful ways. And that's an area of opportunity that will be really important as we come out of the current pandemic.
Thanks, Professor Wayne. Thiru, a quick input from your side.
I also echo Professor Wayne's point. The role of HR and HR leaders is going to change drastically. It is no longer going to be pure engagement and satisfaction and other things. They have to be an excellent facilitator, as well as their own understanding of career architecture has to be redefined. You cannot just have a traditional organizational design mindset where you say, I did it and then it is done. You need to be nimble. You need to be able to create specific agile ways of career architecture within your streams. I think that is where the opportunity lies.
Yeah. Thanks, Thiru. Dr. Chris?
Yeah, two things. One is, from a philosophic perspective, I think humanity, the history of humanity tells us we have survived many pandemics of this nature, and we'll come out of this very successful. Not just survive, but we'll start to thrive. From a practical perspective of looking at it as leadership, I think the future will belong to a new kind of leader, whom, for want of a better term, we'll call him or her, an algorithmic leader who is able to dabble between these multiple competencies and multiple intelligences, and able to handle both technology and the human dimension equally well, so that they are fit for the future. And as Jack Ma said, the leader's job is to create more leaders. So I think that's probably where it has to evolve. We create more leaders down the line.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Chris. Professor Vasanthi?
I think the first one, I'm just wondering, and probably something for HR leaders to reflect about, is the fact that the employee who left you, who stayed back at home early COVID days, is not the employee who's coming back to work whenever they come face to face. They've changed personally in ways that we don't understand. And maybe this is the time to actually look at gratitude and compassion, the two words that probably has to be demonstrated in being a leader. The second piece is, as HR leaders, there's been extraordinary emphasis on rewards and the way we look at talent. We've kind of refined those systems in India. Okay? The question for us is to go back to and ask, what's the role of HR professionals in an organization? And to me, it always comes back that they are the only people responsible for people in the way organizations are structured. Maybe just going back to that and re-examining their role a little more philosophically, a little deeper, is probably all that is needed, because we have the tools and the techniques which require tweaking, adaptation, hybridization. But just maybe the world needs a lot more gratitude and compassion.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I'll add one point more, and which I keep specifying to my leadership team, a lot of humility in terms of dealing with the present situation. So I think some amazing conversation. Personally, I think I have gained a lot from this conversation. Thanks to each of you. And I'm hoping that I will take back some of the learning in my professional world and implement it for my organization. I'm hoping all our listeners also enjoyed the conversation, and possibly they would also take back something that they can actually make a change in their respective organization. So thank you very much and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.